So, trench warfare continues on the Western Front for 4 years, 1914 and 1918. And this is the basic strategy of the war and the way the battles play out. It's not the same on the Eastern Front. It's more of a battle of movement. On the Eastern Front, you're dealing with larger swaths of territory, and as I said, in the early stages, Russia did well, but then Germany is going to have greater success on the Eastern Front, and Austro-Hungary is also fighting on the Eastern Front. They're not only fighting Serbia, where the war begins, which they do very well against Serbia, which is not very surprising, and Austro-Hungary also fights Russia on the Eastern Front. And this war starts to bring in other players as well. When Britain joins the war in August of 1914, they are able to eventually pull on the resources of those men living in the colonies, and there's going to be millions of men really from India and Tanzania, and some of these men will be used in terms of menial labor and supply lines and things like this. And sometimes these conflicts just remain in the colonies. So there's fighting that is going to happen in Africa and in the Middle East. And there's all these other battles that are really happening during the war. And this becomes a globalized war because of issues in the colonies. And some of these issues deal with resources that are going to play out even today. So, for example, in Persia and areas of what we consider Iraq and Iran today, there was fighting with the British over oil resources in this area. And there's a fight for what's again happening in the Eastern question with who's going to control the Straits of the Dardanelles. This is between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. And some of the famous battles of this area is the Battle of Gallipoli, in which the British fight the Turks in this area. The Turks are going to join the Austro-Hungarian side and the Germans. As I mentioned before, Austro-Hungary was hoping for a stable Turkish empire. The Turkish empire is going to change hands during this time. The empire will collapse and a new nation, Turkey, will emerge under the leadership of Kemal Ataturk. In the Battle of Gallipoli, the colonists from Australia and New Zealand will literally try to fight uphill against Turkish soldiers who are fighting in the Dardanelles, shooting against them. And it's a terrible, terrible scenario. And today there's, in Australia and New Zealand, they celebrate Anzac Day, which talks about this battle of Gallipoli, and people go down to that region every year. I have some Australian friends, and this battle is still very important in the minds of these people because they lost so many soldiers. But so the war becomes larger than just the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, things really change in 1917. When the Russian Empire collapses. So the weight of these wars are going to destroy the empires. They're going to collapse upon themselves. The Ottoman Empire collapsed upon itself. The Austro-Hungarian Empire will collapse in 1918. In 1917, the Russian Empire collapses with the Tsar abdicating the throne because of unrest in St. Petersburg and Moscow. He loses control over the nation. And there's really two Russian revolutions. There's one that occurs in February/March 1917. I put a slash there because based on the old Russian calendar, they used a different calendar than the Gregorian calendar. So it was February for them, March for Western Europeans. In this first revolution, the Tsar abdicates, and a somewhat liberal parliamentarian kind of style government emerges, although there's many other issues that go along with this, competing forces who will rule this new Russia. We'll discuss this in a later unit. But when they abdicate, there's a question then of, will Russia remain in the war? Will they stay in the war? And this first new government chooses, unfortunately, to stay in the war. It would have been of their best interest to pull out and to reorganize and stabilize the interior of Russia. They still continue to pursue fighting Germany, and very badly at that. And there's mass desertions on the Russian front when the revolution occurs, because the soldiers believe that maybe there's going to be land given away in Russia, and these are peasant soldiers. They need to get back to be part of that. So France and Britain loses their major ally on the east, and in the early stages of this war, France and Britain begin sending troops to Russia to eventually try and overthrow the second government that's going to emerge, the communist government, in late 1917. So there's so many issues that happens during this war, and we can't cover all of them. But you can see that it's the weight of this war is going to collapse economies. The spending and the necessary spending is going to destroy these governments. Russia collapses. Austro-Hungary is going to collapse right at the end of the war. And Germany itself, the German Empire, the Kaiser, when the war ends, also the German Empire will collapse. That's not to be foreseen in 1917. In 1917, it seems as if Germany is going to win the war, because as the Russian Empire collapses and the Second Revolution happens in October of 1917, the new government under the communists, under Lenin, will negotiate with the Germans to pull out of this war. And Germany's going to gain huge amounts of territory like they've never seen before. All the Baltic nations, into areas we consider Belarus today, and Ukraine. And they're going to take large amounts of Russian territory. And then that German war machine, which was, had to send much of its forces to the east, could suddenly turn its attention back to the west. And in 1918, early 1918, and Vera Britton's book talks about this again, there's this major offensive launched by the Germans called the Ludendorff offensive that General Ludendorff did well on the Eastern Front in the early part of the war. And the mistake, however, is that he turns to an offensive strategy. As we said, this war can be won by defensive measures. Sit and wait. Wait for them to send the men, and then you shoot them down. Germany is going to put this last huge push against France and the French territory, and they're going to gain some territory, miles like they've never seen before, and British and French soldiers are going to be in a mass retreat in the early part. But again, the French and the British are going to be able to dig down again and stabilize, like this war has been stabilized in a stalemate the entire war. This last push, however, really collapses the German economy and the German war machine, and they don't have the energy to continue. At the same time, in 1917, the U.S. finally joins the war and brings in this economic might, brings in money and brings in soldiers. The soldiers are not going to arrive till very late in this war, really, not until the spring of 1918. And even Vera Britton is going to mention again how they look huge, and this is something that people are going to pay attention to. These well-fed Americans are giants compared to the Europeans on this battlefield. Well-fed people in America as compared to not so well-fed Europeans who look small and scrawny, especially at this stage in the war. And having that American military money, especially, is going to be the last kind of factor to swing the war towards the British and the French. And the war is going to end in 1918, November of 1918. November 11th is the armistice. Today we celebrate it as Veterans Day in the U.S. And the Germans are under the assumption they're going to receive favorable terms based on the promises of Wilson's President Wilson's 14 points.